Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to Sikistan. We're fresh off the plane from the Paris Olympics. Well, we're fresh off yesterday. Today's news show is, of course, brought to you by the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. Because we went to the weightlifting at the Paris Olympics, we'll put a spotlight on the weightlifting programs on the app. There's our main weightlifting program. There's some snatch-specific programs. There's clean, power clean-specific programs. There's jerk-specific programs. And then there's clean, pull and press programs also if you need to bring up some strength aspects of your training.
So with all that being said, the first thing we want to talk about today is just how thankful we are for everyone who we met over in Paris. We literally met hundreds of you at the games, before the weightlifting events, after the weightlifting events, as we were sitting down having dinner, and it was so great to see everyone. So thank you so much to everyone who came up to us and said hello. It's also great to see the athletes, people like Benjamin, people like Kyle Bruce. It's absolutely unbelievable to see everyone. So thank you again for your support.
So in today's episode, rather than rehashing the winners of each of those events, you've probably seen them by now already. There's a couple of points that we want to talk about in regards to today's weightlifting news show. So just a little bit different. So there's a couple of controversial and interesting news pieces that have come about since the games have finished or have happened since last week, since we did the last week's news show. And the first one of those is it looks like Lasha isn't retiring, so it's not clickbait in the title. It really looks like Lasha might be going for another Olympic gold and maybe going for a 500 kilo total. So we had thought previously coming up to this that Lasha was going to retire. Rather we thought Lasha should retire. You know, he had those heart problems, which he talked about in the Worlds in Colombia over 2 years ago. He had to lose a little bit for weight for those. He has gained it back since. Look, it's paid off. He's won gold. He said he's had a gold medal for each one of his 3 children now, which is a pretty cool thing to have for your kids. For most of us as fans of the sport, and a lot of people agreed along, you can see in a lot of different places, everyone's like, look, Lasha has done enough for the sport. But obviously he's his own individual and he has more aspirations. What it looks like is happening, and this is on the IWF's website. So this was talking about Kaki. He's obviously Kakashvili, one of the greatest weightlifters ever. Talks about the kind of plan, and the goal is that maybe his dream for Lasha, that Lasha would win a 4th Olympics, so that would be in LA. And then they're also hoping to host the European Championships in 2026. And this would be the setting for Lasha to make his 500 kilos. So as an individual, I think Lasha should still retire. I actually don't even care about 500 kilos, to be honest, that much. If it happens, it's amazing. But as just an empathetic person to another person, it's very clear that Lasha is under a lot of duress and a lot of pain. And to be honest with you, it's very likely he's taking years off his life. So as a person, I'm like, okay, I would just hope he'd retire. He's done enough for us. As a fan of weightlifting, of course, I'd like to see 500 kilos on Lasha for him to keep lifting if he's in good shape.
I do think the idea that Euros is happening in Georgia is a massive help to him. Obviously, the fact that he'd be aiming for that at Euros or Worlds rather than Olympics is also a massive help. Obviously, the qualification for the Olympics takes a lot out of these athletes. It's by no means the ideal situation in a number of different areas for people to hit their best numbers ever at the Olympics. And so hopefully, if he does continue, he'll take a good bit of time off now. Maybe he'll take a few months just to deload, allow his body to recover a bit, maybe even lose a small bit of weight, and then take a 12-month run in. I think he'd definitely be able for it, particularly considering everything that goes along with the Olympics. The 500 kilos was never really going to happen, as we've talked about multiple times at the Olympics in Paris.
So yeah, we'll be very interested to see if Lasha does continue. Again, as I say, I kind of hope he doesn't, as you know, feeling of empathy for someone else. But of course, he's an individual and he can do what he wants with his life. So we will, of course, be following along if he does choose to keep going. I do think the thing Ilya Ilyin used to do after the Olympics was take a big break, nearly 2 years from competition. In return, it kept him in very good shape. I know he had some injuries, but he mitigated a lot of those injuries after he started taking those big breaks. You know, he had a lot of injuries younger in his career, and that's what forced him to be like, okay, rest, keep going, rest and keep going. But on to the next piece of the news show. Very controversial, possibly the most controversial focal point of the whole Olympics in terms of weightlifting in our little corner. Although there was massive crowds at the Olympics, and we were very lucky to see 3 different weight classes. We saw the 89s, the 102s and the super heavies. And we just got a little clip here of the very controversial red light being overturned from Antonio Pizzolatto. So basically what happened, Marion Rhobu and Antonio Pizzolatto were vying for bronze. Antonio went for, we're just going to call him Nino. Nino went for 212 kilos on his third attempt. He missed his first and second attempts in the clean and jerk. He missed 2 snatches. Robu finished on 208. If Nino made this 212 kilos, he would have won bronze. When he was lifting it, it looks like he pressed out his left arm. There's also a shoulder readjustment. He was given 3 red lights. The jury went for a review. As the jury are actually doing their review, Nino's coach is coming out with the one review card to tell them to do that, but they're already initiating it. So they're reviewing the lift. You can hear in this clip, if you get a chance to watch it, we both agreed it's definitely under the rules of weightlifting. There is a no lift for sure. That left arm definitely rebends, but there also is a shoulder readjustment. And based on looking at that, that's what I suspect the jury overturn and give him this lift, which in effect puts the pressure on Robu's third attempt at 212 kilos. Robu comes out then and clarks it. And of course, then Nino gets his bronze medal. Now, I've 4 different specific things I want to talk about, but there's something you want to add before I continue on the monologue.
The first thing I want to talk about here is being there in person, the judging and the perception of the judging and the perception of the jury was very, very questionable on multiple occasions. Now, there's obviously a problem. We have a massive elephant in the room at the moment with the press out rule. It's very, very difficult to make it fair for everyone. I just think, generally speaking, it should be gotten rid of. Whether you believe it should be gotten rid of or not gotten rid of, I definitely think we need to be better at judging it. But the atmosphere in the arena was at the point where I'm almost positive no matter what happened with that jury review, no matter who was sitting in those seats, that would have been overturned and the lift would have been given for Nino. There was a very, very hostile crowd there that had been building up over the course of the session as well. There was a number of poor decisions, just bad decisions all around, which meant that the crowd, there would have been a riot if that wasn't given.
I'm not saying I was the first person to boo every time a red light was given for the press out as a way of my supporting get rid of the press out rule, but I was definitely the loudest. I'm joking. But there a lot of people were booing, and for a lot of press outs and jury reviews of lifts that were good, and it was for multiple sessions, and rightly so, because the press out rule is bullshit. So there's 4 things I've thought about with this. First of all, I feel bad for Robu for sure. He definitely got robbed under the rules. This is clearly a press out. I think there's no one would agree that this is a good lift under the current rules. I'm also happy for Nino. You know, he got a bronze medal. He trained really hard. In numerous sports across the decades, people have won based on poor decisions by refs, and it's not their fault. They are playing the game. Nino isn't going to give Robu the medal. If a Rugby World Cup is lost based on poor ref decisions, the other team don't go, no, you know what, you won. Nobody does that. Nobody in any sport does that. This is Nino's living. Nino's trained for 3 years. He got a lucky break here. No one should be attacking him or giving out to him or commenting on his Instagram. That's just bullshit. It's how it is. If we look at it plainly, if the presser rule is stupid, he lifted more weight overhead. Based on the rules, it's stupid. Based on the culture or the spirit of weightlifting, it's who gets them weight overhead. He got more weight overhead than Robu. So there is a balance to both of those. Thirdly, I don't really like the post hoc kind of video that Robu put up. I'll just be honest. He's obviously, again, his own person. I don't know him. I have nothing to do with him. I don't like this statement to the public about how he was robbed. I think you should take your blows like this a little bit better and just move on. And then kind of a conjunction to that, like 3B or 4 is the fact that he had another lift to win and he clarked it. He had another opportunity to come out and win. He could come out and lift that weight, lift more weight than Nino and win, and he wouldn't need to win on a technicality. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but they're elite athletes. They've been training for 3 years for this other Olympics, and you've got 3 of each lift to go. And if you had another opportunity, it'd be different if he'd done all these 3 lifts and he was robbed and he didn't have a possibility to come back. But he had a chance to override the decision. He had a chance to make that lift, but he clarked the lift. So it is important to kind of weigh up a lot of things that are happening. It definitely sucks. It's obviously great for Nino. He's been training hard. I don't have any particular favourites here. I like both those lifters. They're both great lifters, but there's a lot of talking points, and some of it I don't think is great in the optics for some of those athletes. And, you know, again, looking back at it over the last few days, the fact that he had another lift to go is kind of like, okay, why didn't you make that and then
Yeah.
solidify your medal and not have to try and win based off of technicality, even though it sucks.
The last thing I'd like to touch on, just at this point, and it's because Nino is up in this particular aspect of the new show, is there is a lot of negative chat by the Italian coaches about some of the Italian athletes and talking about things I don't like coaches doing. That's right up there at the top of things to do. And basically saying that they had done their job perfectly and that it was the athlete's fault. I really don't like that. I think it's a terrible sign of the coaching staff and they do that. But we don't know the background that's going on there. Maybe they were correct, but for me personally, it's a big black mark.
So next up, we've got Shi Jiang. So obviously, Shi Jiang didn't make a successful clean and jerk, and this was a large upset. He's got 2 Olympic gold medals so far. He is one of the most dominant weightlifters in any weight class that we've seen of this kind of generation of lifters, and unfortunately wasn't able to make a clean and jerk. Now, when he went for 191, the first attempt was pretty close, but it looked like he could make it again. And we were kind of wondering at the time, why did they open a little bit heavier? Now, we know, everyone knows she has been injured. We know that he was in a position where his clean and jerk mightn't be the best. But given how good his snatches were, given how easy the 165 was on his way out, we were not confused because we suspected something was going on. But we were kind of wondering, why didn't he open a little bit lighter and give himself an opportunity at least to get that total and then move on a little bit further? But it looks like, based on this interview from Squat Jerk Journalist, he is saying that, it doesn't look like it, this is exactly what he's saying. Basically, his back was so bad that anything over a certain percentage, as soon as he does any single clean and jerk, he can't do any more reps. His back gets so sore, the pain is too much that he can't possibly keep going and doing another clean and jerk. So they basically had to guess, based on what risk he was capable of doing, because they remember the 201 from Thailand a couple of months ago. They went down what his form looked like on the day, what she was probably capable of making on over that kind of 190 range based on how his back was, and then they had to risk it for gold. For someone like she, medals, that aren't golds mean essentially nothing. After winning 2 Olympic golds, he's in a position where he doesn't really want a token silver or bronze. You might think that's crazy, but for him as an individual, that's kind of clearly how he thinks. That's his mentality as an elite athlete. And so they had to take a gamble with that 191, hope he made it on the first attempt, maybe look at another possible attempt, but basically it seems like he wasn't able to make any more attempts. And it also looks like he tore his left adductor, which is pretty rough.
Yeah, it is. And it brings up another point. In weightlifting more than any other sport, you've seen, if you've been watching a lot of the Olympics, a massive proportion of the athletes were injured at the time of competition.
Loads of them.
They're not getting injured in competition. They're getting injured in training and in the run-up trying to qualify, which probably brings up a number of question marks over the actual method of qualification. For me personally, I think the qualification this time around was just ludicrous. You had athletes who probably should have been there who weren't able to get there. That was down to a host of reasons, but one of the most main reasons being such a small amount of athletes actually being able to compete at the Olympics. But it was shocking. Like, you had probably 50% of all the athletes we saw lifting had some injury going on at the time, and then obviously it leads to people like people who are literally at the top end of their game, at the top end of the elite end of athletes, and then they're not able to perform at their best, and it kind of puts a question mark over the general structure of how we're competing in weightlifting. How we're structuring the biggest competition for weightlifters is still the Olympics. It's not like there are other places they can go and compete and have that same level of competition going on there. So I definitely think it brings to question how they're going to qualify in LA, what the training is going to look like over the course of the year, and as well how they're just going to plan out that quad next time round, because it wasn't just one country, it wasn't just 1 or 2 athletes from different places, it was probably the majority of people who were lifting.
So a couple other events, obviously things like Olivia Reeves winning gold, Hampton Morris getting silver. We don't have any footage of their lift, so we kind of have to wait and see. Hopefully it'll show up over the next few days, and we can maybe include it in next week's news show with things like Toma bombing, getting a press out on one of her snatches, one of many controversial calls. For example, if we look at the Nino and Robu situation, Lopez on his 210 kilo clean and jerk, Jason Lopez, had a very distinct press on his right arm, no doubt about it. We actually couldn't see it on the stage from our side, but if you go back and look at it on the television, the video box, the moving pictures, he very clearly had a press out. So a lot of good stuff. Just before we move on from the Olympic stuff, I will say we had a great time in Paris. It was very entertaining to watch. The crowds were great. People were very entertaining. It was fantastic meeting a lot of you guys. Obviously, the athletes did their best to show up. So despite continued ineptitude from the International Weighting Federation in regards to rules, setting up the competition, qualification progress, it was still a fantastic Olympics, and I am very, very impressed.
The buzz at the Olympics was insane.
Yeah.
It seemed to be amazing. No, there's hiccups here and there with it, definitely, but Paris just absorbed those Olympics.
Yeah.
It was, everything around there was amazing. Unbelievable experience. Definitely something I'd love to do again.
Paris was a class, but the pastries I had were disappointing. I'm not going to lie to anyone listening. Next up, we've got Alexei Churkin, who we saw last week snatching 170 kilos, a 73 kilo weightlifter. Now, we had no Kazakhstan at this Olympics, but Alexei is obviously training hard. He had this 270 kilo back squat in training. I don't know if he's training much heavier than 73. You'll probably see 2 or 3 kilos of difference. Not that it makes any difference to this kind of weight. You know, it's a massive squat. It also doesn't look maximal, and the technical capacity of this lift, the technique of this is excellent.
Yeah, when you're looking at this 270 at 73 is obviously absurd, but the real absurdity here comes with how fast this squat is and how well he maintains the positions. You're probably going to struggle to find too many people in the world at the moment who are going to be squatting 270 like that. You're not going to see that kind of speed. You're certainly not going to see that kind of speed with that gorgeous upper back position, that really nice torso angle throughout. So hopefully he will be there for LA.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes with some of those countries, and will the Olympic process change? Will the weight classes change? They just need to leave them the same for now, and then we kind of just need to, I think we need to get rid of this weightlifting, Olympic and non-Olympic classes. I think everyone should be pushed into one for overall as a sport. I think it's better because it'll make people a bit more competitive. I know in some ways it sucks for athletes because if you've never a chance at getting gold in a certain class but you might in another, it might be better for you as an athlete, but which I do appreciate for sure. But as a sport, the more concentrated nature of athletes in Olympic competitive classes is very, very important, and we just need to stop changing it around, I think, so over the next couple of years. So there's a good 4-year run. It's very, very hard for athletes to adapt to classes if they have to cut down 2 classes and gain weight. It's very, very, very tough on them. Now moving on, we have got Maxon Shethar squatting 345 kilos. So obviously we've seen Max on the news show quite frequently before, but he is a wonder boy when it comes to back squats, and in this very upright, very deep, low bar style back squat.
Yeah, I really like Max's squat because it gives you an idea where those kind of additional gains can be made. You see, it's a quite wide stance, but he's not sitting all the way back into the hole, so he has a really, really good level of quad recruitment going on there. Even though it's a very classical low bar squat going on, he also has that bar down nice and low on his back, so he's shaving off that leverage that the barbell gains over it being higher on your back. So if you imagine he is going to be leaned over slightly, every inch he manages to bring that barbell back just takes a bit of that force out, takes a bit of that leverage off the barbell and takes it away from his back. And then the last thing he does here is maintain a really good back position while having a very wide grip. So a lot of time with powerlifters, we'll see their grip being quite wide because they obviously have big muscular upper bodies. They're quite restricted in their shoulders, which is a good thing for the other aspects of powerlifting. But sometimes when their grip goes that wide, you'll see them breaking at the wrist. You'll see their elbows coming forward. There's none of that happening here with Max. He does a really, really good job keeping the elbows back, maintaining that shelf for the barbell, and then obviously maintaining his torso angle because of that.
Now, next we've got HafThor Bjornsson squatting a PR 380 kilos for a set of 5. So I wonder if this is a comeback PR or this kind of next big training block, or if this is just quite literally an all-time 5 RM. I'd have to imagine it's probably pretty close to an all-time 5 RM just across his career. And we've got the Brian Shaw's competition coming up. He has a name for it. Is it the strongest man in the world, I think is the name of the competition, and they have a Smith machine but done in the kind of strongman style. Smith machine is probably a wrong word. Fixed machine for squatting like we used to see kind of in the 90s and later. Maybe we've seen it soon in the last couple of years, but I haven't seen anything. I can't think of anything quite similar to that. So a lot of the strongman competitors are getting their their big squats on, and HafThor here with 380 by 5 is obviously trying hard to push that. And it's definitely, it is really interesting to see how he's going to progress with these training goals. He's in his late 30s now. We see strengths can develop for quite a long time, and obviously if you're the right athlete and under the right condition, with the right programming, the right technique, and the right mindset, and the right history of training, big numbers can be done. So I am neither super positive of him getting those goals that he set in terms of 500 and not 500, but I'm not also super negative either. I'm just kind of like, let's see. I'm definitely not like, oh, he's never going to make that. I'm like, he could do it, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see how it plays out.
You're keeping your powder dry.
Yes.
One thing that always strikes me, and it's particularly strange in the case of HafThor, is that he is an unbelievably famous strength athlete. He's probably the most famous strength athlete we have in the world at the moment, or definitely top 5. Yet we still have people commenting on his Instagram, telling him about the depth of his squat, telling him about how legit his squat is. And by both these, I mean in the negative connotation. I just find it very, very strange. It's not like this is somebody who's unknown, who you might think is a beginner, who you might think your advice is valuable to, but your advice really isn't valuable to HafThor Bjornsson.
Here we've got Away Sharma. So he is a powerlifter, and he hit this 990 kilo total this week. So he said he didn't go for a peak. He said the fatigue is high and the end of a volume block, which is always a good sign. So he squatted 400 wheelies, 400 kilos, which was a PB for him, benched 230 kilos, and deadlifted 360 kilos, which was another PB for him. Now, the interesting thing about this was both Darren and I agreed, and we said this independently in our own mind before we said the words out loud, was we feel like he should be deadlifting more, even though obviously 360 kilos is massive. It's just that he's built usually what we'd see like a very good deadlifter might be built like, and when he's squatting 400 kilos like that, it's surprising he's not deadlifting more. Not that it diminishes his 360 kilo PB by any means, but it was an interesting note. The other thing note is that 400 kilos is moving outrageously fast on this.
Yeah, he has a really good squat for somebody who has, as Owen talked about, non-ideal squatting proportions. So what we're talking about here is long legs and short torso, essentially makes for easier deadlifts and more difficult back squats. Now, the thing that could be going on here is that we're getting that slight delay between the development of the back squat and then the deadlift catching up with it. So the back squat, oftentimes for competition powerlifting, is the main driver of the deadlift. We're squatting multiple times per week. We're using that as the main form of increasing or mode of increasing our strength, and then the deadlift will kind of piggyback on that increase in strength and go up in due course. So it is very, very common where somebody might do 2 or 3 cycles of strength training where they're really pushing their squat, and their squat might go up on each of those 3 strength cycles, but it's only as we get towards the end of the second or third strength cycle that our deadlift will actually go up. And in a very classic case here, you'll see, like many of the Sika programs, you'll see the rotating or squat program, the original one, is 8 weeks long, but the deadlift program is 10 weeks long. And that just gives you that chance, the extra couple of weeks at the end of the cycle, for that deadlift to catch up, for you to get some dissipation of fatigue from that squat, and then the deadlift strength numbers to increase due to that. Now, the other thing that has to be said here, if the volume is that high, and he's been doing a lot of high frequency, high volume work, as he's called it, a volume block, it's likely that just doing that total might have been enough to really fatigue him. I'm not sure if it's on the same day, I'm not sure if it's in the same week when he's hitting these PBs, but it's very likely he did the back squat first, and there was some fatigue incurred, and then the deadlift had some decrement because of that.
Now here we've got a look at the strongest man on earth. That was the name of the competition from Shaw. So this is the squat machine that they're squatting with. A very interesting contraption. Must have taken a lot of work to get that right. So it'll be quite interesting to see what everyone ends up squatting on this. They didn't say any particular weights on this. So if anyone knows what the weights are going to be on this, I would be very, very interested to see. And hopefully it is for max reps. It is a little bit more interesting, I think, in strongman when they go for repetitions, because the single rep stuff is cool, but it's not as novel, I suppose, unless we see them go for heavy reps on things. And definitely on a machine like this where you get kind of a bit more of a fixed point of strength training, and you get an idea of what people are doing. So I'm looking forward to seeing some videos of this.
Yeah, I think there's obviously an advantage to a massive contraption like this in terms of viewing pleasure and how impressive this is to look at. There is, of course, problems with it that you don't immediately reference what weight that is. I think in many cases, when you see someone deadlifting a small car or something, it becomes easier for you to view that or picture what that weight would feel like in your own head. But the other massive advantage with a contraption such as this and using it for a large competition is that an athlete can essentially leave everything out there. No matter what happens, that barrels aren't going to crush them down. No matter what happens, it's not like they're lifting out from a squat rack, and if they go for the 11th rep or 12th rep when they probably should have stopped at 10, they can just fall underneath the barbell, and it is far safer for them. So there are pros and cons to the big kind of apparatus lifts, but definitely in this case it allows athletes to push themselves a bit more, possibly leading to a bit more entertaining of a competition without the risk of death,
which is great ever for a competition. Next up, we've got Ono Shohei, so one of the best judo athletes who's been retired for a couple of years, but he seems to be on some kind of world tour from Japan in terms of going to different national federations, and seems to be taking them on kind of training camps and seminars, which is a very cool thing to be doing. It's obviously probably unbelievable if you're a younger athlete who would have looked up to him to have him come to your club and train, and he's taking them through some strength conditioning aspects here. We can see him doing muscle ups, which is very impressive, snatches, power cleans. Obviously, we would have looked at Ono's training before, and we would have seen lots of those Olympic lifts and those very, very heavy Olympic lifts. We'd also seen him squatting very, very heavy. And it's very cool that even in their judo gym, they have this segmented section. In Jenny's Judo Club somewhere in Kazakhstan, we have this section where they have new bumpers, barbells, very solid plates, or very solid platforms, and an opportunity for the lifters to be able to do their S&C in the club. So it just goes to show how important S&C is for judo. You know, they do a really good job. Something I've kind of noticed that we've been working with judo athletes kind of over the years is that they're actually doing a very good job of lower body strength, so squatting, pulling, being in good condition. But one of the things I actually do see being missed a little bit in judo is a bit more upper body strength, a little bit more upper body brute force, which is very, very useful for a lot of the throws. And obviously that lower body strength is incredibly important, and you'll still push the squat and you'll still push the deadlift. But things like benching, strict press, pull-ups, weighted pull-ups. So we'll see a lot of upper body endurance, a lot of grip endurance. We'll see a lot of ab training, which is definitely very, very useful. Make no mistake about it. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing that. But I would say if you're a judo athlete, just take a little look at your own training and see how does your lower body training match up to your upper body pressing ability in terms of strict press and bench press, pull-ups, behind the neck press. I bet you'll probably see that you're probably a little bit better at the squatting aspect. And I bet you'd see even then further, if you gave some 3 to 6 months or longer, make it a core part of your training just to push that upper body strength a little bit more in the larger movements, I bet you'd see an increase in your kind of capacity during judo. I bet you'd see a notable increase if you give it enough time and push those numbers big enough.
Yeah, the last thing I'd like to talk about here is just the exercise selection. So obviously the questions we get from judo athletes and jiu-jitsu athletes all the time is, what are the best exercises I need to be doing? And we commonly kind of echo back this thing of exercise selection can be super simple. And you see it here. Ono Shohei's own training videos when he was competing were super simple. Squatting, deadlifting, pressing, rowing, some power cleans, some snatches. It never got overly complicated. We didn't see any of the weird sandbag stuff in there. We never saw him doing any strange, super specific exercises. And it's the exact same here when he's going around to the federations. There's no need to overcomplicate any of the work. It's nice, simple exercise selection. You'd see them talking about the specific techniques in each of those, making sure you have the range of motion in each of those movements, which just proves how kind of effective they are at learning those movements, making sure you're a master of the deadlift, a master of the back squat, a master of the power clean, and that will then make you better at your sport itself. The final thing here as well I absolutely love to see is he's wearing a drinking t-shirt that says Whiskey 1, Whiskey 2, Whiskey 3, Whiskey 4, all 4 getting more blurry as they go down.
Humorous, no doubt. Next up, we've got New Zealand, the rugby team, or the All Blacks. Had to say that because before someone was like, why did you call them the All Blacks? Because that's their name. It's not everything's racist. So we have them benching here in the gym. Seems to be some kind of testing day because they seem to be going pretty heavy. Now, the first thing I said to Fitz here was that in typical New Zealand All Black rugby team fashion, a lot of the times by the next season, you don't recognise half the players. You're like, who the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Like, you have the stalwarts, you know, you'll see them over a couple of years coming to the Rugby World Cup. But a lot of the time when they put up a new gym video, you don't even recognize several of the players. And then they'll oftentimes be doing stuff like here, benching 200 kilos, benching 180 kilos, you know, massive lifts.
Yeah, the depth of talent they have domestically and the depth of talent they have coming in from some of those island nations is absolutely insane all the time with New Zealand. Now, what I'd like to look at as well with the bench press here, you'll see a lot of these guys are extremely strong. So moving between 140 and 180 kilos quite easily, many of them for reps as well. But the big kind of aspect of their benching is how strong their lockouts are. So you'll see here, it might be quite slow through that initial portion. They might be using quite a lot of bounce off the chest, but a lot of them will have that incredibly aggressive full extension of the elbow at the very end. And I think that comes down to obviously some sport specific training, but a big focus point of the All Blacks S&C for years has been that high speed force output. So really focusing on that speed strength, making sure the end of that rep is as fast as possible, getting the barbell moving as quickly as possible. And you can definitely see it there on those reps.
Now, here we've got a kind of old school training clip from a pole vaulter. So this is put up by Romain Cachavinda. So he posted this clip of a pole vaulter, Sergiu Bobka.
Yeah,
and there's several gym specific pole vaulting exercises. And it was very funny that I saw this clip because quite literally, I was watching at the Olympics, watching the pole vault. I was like, okay, how would we ever help someone do strength conditioning for pole vault training? It's one of the few sports, I think, at this stage where we haven't encountered anyone where we've had to assist them. It's obviously a very niche sport, and while it's very competitive, it's not exactly a common recreational sport or in the terms of numbers of, you know, if we compare it to judo or wrestling or sprinting or athletics, just the volume of people doing pole vault specifically is pretty small. So I was thinking about that, and then I was wondering, do we have any gym work? So there's obviously a section of training where they'll do stuff like strength conditioning, but then there's probably, what would you call them, technique primers for pole vaulting that you would do in the gym. And I'd wonder how common these are. But the most important thing I was looking at here, the first one, was just how impressed I am with his body control when he's doing the kind of back roll to a handstand and rolling back into it, and the fluidity of that was quite impressive. It was very pleasing to watch, to be honest.
Yeah, the physical literacy required for some of the track and field events really goes unnoticed. You know, we see someone sprinting really fast down the track with a pole in their hand. They seem to kind of spring up there, but rarely do we think about that level of kind of proprioceptive awareness, their level of physical control like Owen talked about. And doing drills like this is definitely one of the ways you can gain that, definitely one of the ways you can train that system without necessarily having to put in all the effort of doing the actual pole vault itself. Now, what I think is an interesting element of this video as well is we see some kind of kipping to handstand ring holds at the very end of this video. And when we look at how proficient he is with that kind of roll back into the handstand position, we see how proficient he is with the backwards or upside down rope climb that's weighted, looks to be weighted with a 10 or 15 kilo plate. And yet when we see him kipping into that handstand hold position on the rings, we see a position that many gymnasts wouldn't be very happy with. And that kind of gives you yet another idea of how much control will be involved for a gymnast. We'll see that move quite commonly on the rings, and yet when they do it, it just looks so much different. It looks so much more controlled. So it's crazy. We get a lot of cross training in many of the track and field sports, and we get a lot of people using the same movements. We get them using the same modalities for getting stronger, faster, more skilled. But there is a big difference across those sports in terms of how well coordinated people are in certain aspects, how powerful they are in other aspects, and it's just another interesting talking point.
Next up, we've got what I think is the Texas College. So one of the universities said Texas Speed Training. So I'm actually not quite sure if this is university or college or one of the actual NFL teams. But what they're doing here is weighted sprints with chains. Now, weighted sprints is very, very interesting for athletes looking to get faster. We've talked about this a lot before, but when you're doing speed events, you generally don't want to be doing things that are slower. Now, some people have argued that it is making you slower in the kind of medium term, so you're actually negatively affecting your speed. But I don't think that's particularly the case, but what's more important there is that if you're doing incorrect speed training, you're just not getting a lot of benefit to your speed or any benefit, and you're probably just accruing fatigue, which isn't making you faster, or rather it's not productive training. So weighted sprints are very, very interesting, and there's kind of two thought processes around this, or depending on who you would ask, what research you would look at, and do the benefits from speed training happen? And there's conflicting research. They're very, very commonly used, and I suppose colloquially or culturally among coaches, a lot of sprint coaches are a big fan of them. And in terms of weighted sprints or resisted sprints, we might see a cable, we might see a parachute happening. There's two aspects. It's either a technical improvement or maybe a physiological improvement. What is exactly happening and causing that is probably up for debate. There's definitely technical aspects, and a lot of coaches would look at it in that fashion. That's primarily how we would look at it in terms of technical improvement. And then as a result, you usually see an improvement in that linear speed for the acceleration phase. And it is very, very valuable. You can do partner resisted ones with a band. But there may be some physiological aspect going on here that's out of the norm. The fact that they're just sprinting, is there a physiological benefit from doing weighted sprints that's different from them just doing sprinting? So obviously there's physiological occurrences happening when they're just doing their sprint training anyway, but is there something particularly unique that's not just technical adaptation with weighted training? It is very interesting. The research is quite conflicting, so it's probably something that'll be exposed a little bit more in the, I suppose, coming years as research continues on that.
Yeah, there's two other aspects I'd like to talk about here for this particular application. The first of these is the fact that a lot of the time when we look at speed work or we look at agility work, and we look at it in the case of a field sport such as American football, we get people commenting, talking about this isn't best practice and they might be a sprinter, or this isn't best practice and they might be a track athlete of some sort. Now, our demands for developing speed and developing acceleration in a track athlete is very different from developing speed and acceleration in a 100-meter sprinting athlete, as the same way it's very different from developing speed in a 5K athlete. So when we look at someone like this, they're mostly going to be starting from the most ideal position they'll start from is a 3-point stance. So 2 feet in the ground, 1 hand on the ground, and they'll get to start in that position. They're already in the inclined forward position. But most of the time when they're going to have to really start developing strength, they'll be in a slightly crouched bipedal position, and they'll have to go from that position. And that's so different from an athlete who's starting in blocks, an athlete who's always going to start in a 3-point stance. In this case, just adding a weight behind them so they get their torso forward, so they stay down in that accelerated position, so they can get that higher rate of steps going a small bit earlier and keep that going for a bit longer. That makes a massive difference. Just giving someone that physical cue, getting them to lean into the sprint, allows them to develop speed much quicker. Now, the last thing you'll see here is chains being used, and chains aren't really commonly used in weighted sprinting context. But in this case, I think they're actually one of the best things you could possibly use. So the big problem we have with weighted sprints is that most of the time we have to bring a sled with us. We then have to bring weights to put on top of that sled. In most facilities, if you're on a track or on an AstroTurf pitch like this is, you're not going to be allowed to use that. You'll probably end up ruining that Astro pitch, and then you'll have to just use a single 15-meter track of AstroTurf for your sled work or anything like that. In this case, we have chains. We can simply loop in more chains for the heavier athletes, take out some chains for the lighter athletes. They're very low impact on the track themselves. You'll see here, it's just barely picking up that kind of rubber crumb that's mixed in with the AstroTurf. And I think it's a great application of weighted sprinting, or a great implement for it in this case.
Next up, we've got what I would consider probably one of the most impressive athletic feats I've seen in quite a while, despite being at the Olympics, you would say. But this is Colton Paul, and this is the AC Heritage Center showing us what they call a 2-foot jump or a 2-foot high kick. So this is one of the traditional Alaskan games, and this was, I suppose, simply put, how high can you kick the ball with 2 feet? There also seems to be several other sports, and they seem to demonstrate them, but this particular clip of Colton is outrageous. The vertical jump capacity, coordination, flexibility, all of that maxed in here is insane. He makes it look so casual. He makes it look so precise. It's very kind of, I want to say, acrobatic, somewhat aesthetic. Something about it is very pleasing to watch him do this. It really does look like some kind of dance move, but in fact it's 8 foot in the air, 10 foot in the air. I have no idea
I have no idea what height that is.
It is outrageous. That could be 12, maybe not. Maybe like 10 or 11 foot. It is ridiculous. I'd love to know the actual height of that.
The scary thing here is just look at his hips. So look at the change in height of his hips, which is an important thing. How high can we bring our center of mass above our normal standing height is the big thing we're always looking at for vertical jump height. He has a phenomenal vertical jump before anything else starts. Then his ability to kick his toes probably 4 or 5 inches above the head of it, or the height of his head, is another amazing physical feat. And then the final thing I'd say here is it looks like this happens every day during the tourist season.
That's what it seems like.
So they say like 11 a.m., 12 noon and 5 p.m. or something in the evening. I hope to God this young fella isn't being made do this 3 times a day, because that is just... it's absurdly impressive.
Yeah, it is outrageous. So these kind of traditional games, it reminds me of some of that stone lifting. So if you look around like Ireland or Iceland or some of the, maybe Scotland, you'll see a lot of there's stones from generations gone by. And it's very interesting. You know, we've games in Ireland like hurling, which are hundreds, thousands of years old. And it's always very impressive to see just how athletic they are and what the cultural implications of them were. But this is just an outright crazy display of athleticism.
I had seen there's some other sports in, I don't know what they call the Inuit Olympics or the Eskimo Olympics, and there's like the slippery pole one where you're basically sitting there, the soles of your feet are against the soles of your opponent's feet, you're both sitting on the ground, you hold one side of the stick, the other person holds the other side of the stick, and you basically have a tug of war against each other on a lubed up pole. And I think they do the ear wrestling as well.
So this is hashtagging Alaskan Native Games.
So probably that.
So here we've got Tyreek Hill doing a kind of specific speed drill that they have for football. And this is kind of picking back off something I was talking about last week in regards to dorsal flexion and sprinting. And while it can certainly be useful off the blocks for sprinters, it's really useful for field sports athletes and having that range of motion available to you. And if you have that range of motion available to you, and you've been doing lots of sprinting, and you've a lot of force output available to you from strength training or naturally or a combination of both of those, it makes for a very, very strong position when you're trying to change direction. You can see it here, how far over the knee he's traveling. Now, we know his heel is lifting, but his knee is traveling really far over his toes. And if you have this really free range of motion available to you here, and you have it while you're practicing with your sprinting, and then you've a lot of strength in your legs, and you've practiced using the strength and speed drills, you can increase your capacity to be faster, change of direction. Remember, change of direction is as much about strength as it is about being fast, because you need to decelerate. And one of the best ways, and it's really consistently shown, is that the stronger your legs are, the better you are at slowing yourself down and stopping yourself faster, and then you'll be able to quickly take off even better if you have that available to you. And so if we have a greater range of motion, you have more options available to you. And very likely, although it hasn't really been well studied, I think we could make a good conclusion based off what we understand about training biology. If you have more range of motion available to you, you've a lot more elastic tendons, but you've also doing a lot of strength training with them, you're probably more resilient to being experiencing stuff like avulsion fractures, Achilles ruptures, tearing or pulling muscles. You're probably more resilient to that. We can look at that inferred from sports like weightlifting, where we never really see Achilles tears, and even though we see very violent, fast and extremely heavy movements, we see it a lot more in field sports. So if you have a long range of motion, if you have very elastic tendons and they're used to being in these long range of motion or these deep stretches, and if you're strong there and you're confident there, you're probably more injury resistant, but also very likely giving yourself the capacity to be faster and a bit more athletic in your sport, especially on the pitch. But we could take this to court, tennis, badminton, any number of sports like that.
Now, one thing looking at this drill, if you're looking to do it yourself, one aspect or one coaching cue on these, we look at the placement of those cones. Obviously, the placement of this cone is to emulate a certain evasion pattern. So you'll have this for soccer players, rugby players, hockey players, football players. They'll be basically doing a certain movement pattern that you commonly use to get away from a marker or something like that. Now, you'll see in this case, the cones are quite close together. So obviously, they want to be working in a short area. But many times we'll see people going for something we refer to as like a hung leg. So I take a step off my left leg, I'm lunging towards that second cone, and I'm going to plant with my right leg. But you'll see here that leg stays up in the air. It restricts the amount of steps we're taking. That then restricts the amount of speed we're going to generate. And so if you're looking to do this yourself, it's very important it's not one big step, one big step, one big step, one big step. We really want to be quite agile with that. We want to make sure we don't have one leg kind of hopping up in the air where we're just leaning our center of mass and leaning our body over and then planting our foot again. It's very important you're driving into the ground the entire time and then driving into that next corner to make the move again. So it's not just step, 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 and catch. You really want to be driving to the corner, and getting as much force put into the ground as you possibly can.
Lastly, we have got a video of Bry van der Berg. There's surely no way I messed that up. Surely, it's not possible. That's surely phonetically correct. So he was a gold medalist just recently gone at Paris Olympics, and we would have seen some of his teammates like Harry with that very nice power clean. And this is 2 weeks ago, so just prior to the Olympics. We have this 28 plate belt squats. You know, obviously here at Sika Strength, we're massive fans of the belt squat for strength athletes, for field sports athletes, for any athlete at all, if we're looking for any hip and knee extension. Now, they've done a couple of things that are interesting choices here, but one of them is just how heavy this is. I think that's the most impressive part of this, and very likely played a part in his gold medal for a sport in the velodrome or the circle cycling. I think that's what they call it colloquially. I think that's
circle cycling?
The slang. Well, even though it's oval cycling.
It's 700 kilos on a belt squat.
You suspect?
Obviously, you don't. That's 700 kilos. You might be feeling more than 700. You might be feeling less, depending on how that machine is set up, depending on where that weight is actually centered on that lever arm itself. But 28 plates, divide that by, if we say 4 plates per 100 kilos, so we've 700 kilos on the belt squat. Now, it's an interesting variation. We very rarely see a belt squat being used for 1 rep max. We very rarely see it being used in that kind of fashion where they're sitting back onto the box with a vertical shin, so not really targeting the quads. But you'll see as he drives up out of the bottom position, we have a very strong eccentric loading going through the quads, which is obviously massively beneficial for velodrome cycling. But 700 kilos is just mind-boggling.
You'll see the great thing about a belt squat here is even though they're sitting back and we're getting a vertical shin angle, you'll see that it forces you to take the load onto your quads. You'll see his knees moving forward and his shins moving forward, which is what he needs for his sport, which is incredibly important. And it's one of the reasons it's great for a lot of you guys. So if you are looking to use the belt squat, I'd recommend not doing it to a box, and I'd recommend not using the handles. You don't want anyone to use your handles. We want this all in the legs. We want to get this as light as possible and as specific as possible, so we can kind of keep our assistance work. So no use of the handles. Keep your weightlifting shoes on preferably, and you're just all focusing on driving the knees forward. Don't sit back. Driving those knees forward. Keep pushing that shin angle forward to squat up out of the hole in the belt squat. You'll feel the tension in your quads. Nothing comes close to it. Not even high bar squatting, not even if you've weightlifting shoes and, you know, incredible dorsiflexion available to you and a load of flexibility. Nothing puts as much tension on your quads if you're lacking in this area like a good belt squat machine. The close second is zombie squats with heel elevated, which is very, very good, but the belt squat is magnificent for this, and it's so good because it's so specific. It takes a lot of the load off your back, so you get a lot of benefits to it. So I hope you enjoyed today's news show. The kind of Olympic recap special there on weightlifting. Thank you to everyone who sends stuff into the news show. I look through every one of those every single week, and there's a lot of this that we wouldn't see, especially on the athletic side. There's just so many different sports and athletes that is really important for the news show. So please do keep DMing those in. We look through every single one of them, and we're very, very grateful for that. Don't forget to check out the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. If you're an athlete, if you're a weightlifter, there's definitely something on there for you. 7-day free trial for everyone who signs up. We won't take your money before the 7 days, but you'll want us to take your money because you'll want to keep hitting PBs. And great results from the app, and we're always looking to update it. So leave a comment below. Let us know what your favourite thing here was. I think definitely the Alaskan thing was
the 2-footed jump for me.
It's in my brain. That's very impressive. I kind of want to try this now.